The story begins with a fierce battle between the dragon race and the elves. At the forefront, leading the elves against the mighty beasts, is Her Highness, Princess Anastasia. In the heat of the battle, the Dragon King himself unleashes her final trump card. Panicking, advisors scream for Princess Anastasia to retreat, but the fearless leader refuses. If she falls back, the eternal heart will be lost to the other races. With that resolve, she calls upon the wisdom of her ancestors and unleashes the ultimate magic. Suddenly, a massive explosion blinds the world as light devours everything in its path, including the Dragon King. When the smoke finally clears, Anastasia wakes alone, lying by the sea. Confused and drained, she stares at the waves and realizes the battlefield is gone, and even her comrades are nowhere to be seen. As she struggles to regain her bearings, she hears a fearful roar coming from the forest behind her. Out of the shadows, the fearful-looking protagonist emerges, clutching a club and staring with wild eyes. The elf princess freezes in panic and takes off running, screaming desperately for the wind to blow the crazy man away, but nothing happens. Terrified, she runs barefoot across the sand while the protagonist, Deku, chases her down the shore with crazed determination. Reaching a cliff with nowhere left to run, Anastasia leaps, expecting her wings or magic to save her, but nothing happens, and she realizes she can't fly. As she falls, Deku grabs her midair, catching her by the leg. She screams, certain this is the end. But instead of attacking, Deku begs for her help, saying he's been stranded on the island for a week with no escape. Once saved, Anastasia proudly introduces herself as the 7th princess of the Elven Empire, and then explains that she was thrown onto the island after a magical collision. But Deku stares at her in disbelief and refuses to play along with her delusion. Frustrated, Anastasia insists on her royal title and demands respect, while Deku just dismisses her story as nothing more than a coping mechanism. He shouts that she needs to accept reality, that she's not a Disney princess and she has no magic. But Anastasia's pride won't allow it. Desperate to prove him wrong, Anastasia raises her hand and shouts spell after spell. Warp, Heal, Meteor Storm, Violet Nova, each with the full force of her conviction, but not a single spell works. She panics, unable to comprehend why she of all people has suddenly become powerless. But suddenly, the hairy guy shouts in terror, pointing behind her. Anastasia turns to see a slime and immediately dismisses it as nothing more than a weak monster. But the slime suddenly lunges forward and wraps around her. Her body is restrained, and as she struggles, the slime's jelly forces its way into her mouth and cuts off her breath. At that moment, she sees Deku take off running. Watching him abandon her without lifting a finger to help, flashes of memory tear through her mind. Princess Anastasia remembers being ignored as a child by her father, the king, because her mother was not favored. Then she recalls the sudden day her overwhelming magical power awakened. From that moment on, she was loved and celebrated as a once-in-a-thousand-years genius. Now, trapped inside the suffocating slime, Anastasia realizes that all the affection she received only came because of her magic, and without it, she has no one. Just as her vision begins to blur, the bearded man courageously rushes in with nothing but his club and swings down hard at the slime. As the creature bursts apart, he grabs the princess from its grip and pulls her free. The monster writhes behind them, but Deku doesn't hesitate. He lifts the princess into his arms and bolts, carrying her away from the suffocating nightmare. Finally safe, Deku explains that the monster they faced suffocates its prey whenever they drop their guard. He admits that when he first arrived on the island, the same monster nearly sent him to the afterlife as a living sacrifice, but he discovered it feared fire and named it the slimy, suffocating demon. Anastasia, resting in his arms, then weakly asks why he bothered saving her, insisting there's no need to save someone like her, useless, powerless, and unable to use magic anymore. But Deku looks at her, wondering if her brain is still twitching, and then tells her it's not about benefits. He says he's just doing what any responsible adult should do. In a firm voice, the hairy man promises that no matter if she's unwell, crazy, or powerless, he'll still help her. Upon hearing this, the elf princess blushes at his words, caught off guard by his sincerity. Later that night, Deku struggles to start a fire the old-fashioned way, rubbing sticks together while Anastasia watches in disbelief, amazed at how primitive humans can be. Even so, the protagonist keeps trying, with sweat pouring down as darkness falls. Suddenly, Anastasia clutches her chest in pain, wondering if something is wrong with her body or if the real issue is the island itself. Determined to find out, she lifts her hand to the sky and with great focus senses the mana in the air. To her shock, the mana is incredibly faint, which she assumes is the reason her magic failed. But she reasons that if she focuses all her attention and adjusts her power to match it, she should be able to cast spells again. Eager to test her theory, Anastasia chants a grand spell, Meteor Storm, while the hairy guy looks on in shock, wondering what she's up to. But instead of a catastrophic meteor shower, a tiny pebble drops from the sky with a pathetic plop. The elf princess freezes in embarrassment while Deku immediately dashes forward, scooping it up before it burns out. Using dried grass, he carefully nurses it into a spark, and finally the fire comes alive in his hands. Meanwhile, Anastasia watches in awe, impressed by his persistence. As he carefully sets the ember onto the pile of sticks, Deku excitedly thanks Anastasia, saying it was only possible because she was there. He praises her magic, amazed that it was real after all, and then apologizes for treating her like an asylum escapee. Beaming, he says that with magic by his side, they can overcome any obstacle. Blushing, Anastasia turns shyly, proud yet embarrassed, and replies she is relieved he has finally recognized her greatness. Following that, Deku adds that since he's terrible at making fire, he'll count on her from now on. But as he talks, Anastasia grows nervous, realizing that using magic here drains her completely. Suddenly, her mana drops to 0, and she collapses to the ground. Deku panics, rushes over, and then asks if she's tired. In a trance, Anastasia hears her subordinates shout that the dragon race has broken through the barrier and is charging straight toward the mothership. Shock flashes across her face as soldiers cry out that the enemy is already upon them, infiltrating at terrifying speed. But when Anastasia finally sees the so-called dragons, her jaw drops. Instead of massive beasts, swarms of tiny flying creatures flood the room. She grabs one, only for it to bite her hand. She panics, but as she screams for reinforcements against the miniaturized dragons, she jolts awake and is sad to realize she was only dreaming. Scratching furiously at her body, covered in bug bites, Anastasia complains that the insects are too ferocious and she barely slept. Just then, Deku greets her casually, asking if she slept well. Her heart skips unexpectedly, but she brushes it off and replies that she's fine. After that, he shows her the signal markers he made with driftwood, hoping a rescue team searching for her might notice. But Anastasia snaps that such effort isn't necessary. She's confident that, as commander of her army, her people must have already realized she vanished from the battlefield and are probably on their way to retrieve her. Confused, the hairy man frowns and asks what nonsense battlefield she's talking about. Stunned, Anastasia stares at him, unable to believe the dude is completely clueless about the world war unfolding. Sighing in frustration, she decides to explain. She tells him the world is dominated by 3 powerful races, the elves, the dragons, and the demons. Each rules a separate realm, and now all 3 fight over one thing. The Eternal Heart, a crystal holding infinite magical power and mana. Whoever claims it, she explains, will take over the world. But Deku just looks at her like she's capping, or worse, completely delusional. That aside, Anastasia admits she hasn't had any water since yesterday and asks him for some. But the bearded man bluntly tells her he doesn't have any, and then explains he used to survive on coconuts when he first arrived on the island, but he finished the last one the day before. Anastasia's eyes widen in horror at the thought of surviving without water. Nonetheless, she tries to reassure herself that her army will find her soon, but then her brain finally clicks. She suddenly remembers that the island has almost no mana, and without it, her location can't be tracked by magic. Panic sets in as she realizes this means her rescue might never come in time since they'll have to search for her physically. Suddenly, Anastasia staggers to the ground, dizzy, and Deku immediately rushes to her side, worried she's dehydrated. Seeing her struggle, he tells her he just remembered where water might be. He says he recalls spotting a pool on his first day, but ignored it since he had no container. But now, with survival uncertain, he declares they must secure water first. With that, they begin trekking through the forest, but suddenly Anastasia winces and cries out in pain. Deku figures she stepped on something sharp and then kneels to check her foot. Flustered, Anastasia turns red at the sudden closeness. He sees she's been stabbed by a dead branch, removes it carefully, and then asks why she isn't wearing shoes, to which Anastasia admits she usually floats with levitation magic, so she never needed them. While helping her to her feet, the dark-haired man notices she's burning up and immediately asks her to remove the thick cape before heatstroke finishes her. But the elven princess refuses, insisting it's no ordinary cape. Through a flashback, she explains that the cape was given to her by her father and is worn only by the most powerful commanders of the Elven Empire. She swears she won't remove it until she presents the Eternal Heart to her father. The human sighs, saying her reason makes no sense, but the elf princess tells him his face being that ugly makes no sense. When they finally reach the water spot, Deku's expression darkens, seeing that the pool he saw earlier has completely dried up. Feeling hopeless, Anastasia collapses, unable to bear the exhaustion and thirst. But a few minutes later, something wet drips onto her lips and she drinks greedily, finding it cold and refreshing. As her strength slowly returns, her eyes flutter open, only for her to freeze in horror, convinced she just drank the guy's white juice. She immediately explodes in fury, screaming and nearly trying to cut off her tongue. But the bearded human, holding up a sock filled with mud, calmly explains that it's water and then explains his survival method. He says even if surface water dries up, the ground below still holds moisture. So by wrapping soil in cloth and squeezing it, he filters out dirt and sand, producing drinkable water. On hearing this, Anastasia's disgust instantly shifts into admiration as she stares in awe, realizing his ingenuity. She admits he's much smarter than she thought, though she refuses to say it out loud. That settled, Deku then insists she drink more since it's safe. However, Anastasia hesitates, refusing to drink alone, but he assures her he's still got one left, and then shows her the other pair of his socks, also filled with mud. Anastasia nearly dies at that moment, realizing the dude actually put the water in his disgusting socks. She flares up instantly, hurling the filthy socks to the ground, and declares that as the princess of the Elven Empire, she would never ever drink something so humiliating. Deku only sighs in frustration, seeing that the proud princess still doesn't understand the brutal reality of survival. He challenges her words, bluntly pointing out that survival matters more than pride or noble duty. He tells her that if she truly carries the Empire's future, then protecting herself should come first, and leaving the island alive should be her top priority. His sharp reasoning pierces through Anastasia's pride, and tears start to form. She admits her father entrusted her with the Empire's fate, and letting pride risk her life would betray that trust. With newfound resolve, the Elven princess lifts the sock from the ground and begins to drink. Gritting her teeth, she swallows the foul water with her mind flashing to the thought of the dude's disgusting feet, but her willpower holds strong. Shocked yet impressed, Deku watches as she gulps it down and even demands more. Even if it stinks, even if it's humiliating, Anastasia declares she will survive at any cost, no matter how degrading. The next day, Deku manages to secure water, filling 7 plastic bottles he found. He explains to Anastasia that since humans only need about 1.5 liters of water per day, they can ration it carefully. But then he points out that with the heat, one person will probably end up drinking a full bottle daily, so at best, their supply will only last 3 days. The princess frowns, realizing how little that really is, and then questions the source of the containers. When the hairy man explains that the bottles came from trash washed ashore, Anastasia cringes at the thought, but he shrugs it off, saying hygiene doesn't matter much when survival is on the line. Reluctantly, Anastasia agrees, but suddenly her stomach growls loud enough to echo. She becomes embarrassed, but Deku admits he's starving too and suggests they search for food before sunset. As they walk, Anastasia, realizing she doesn't know his name, asks, and the rugged-looking man finally introduces himself and reveals his is also a high school teacher from Tokyo. The princess, confused, calls Tokyo a village and asks what kind of magic he teaches. When he clarifies that he's just a Japanese language teacher, she stares at him in pity, mistaking him for a failed magician. She immediately assumes that because of his teaching skills, he is versed in primitive wisdom. But Deku insists he's no survival expert, just an amateur who learned from books and by watching Luke Nichols' videos on YouTube. However, he reassures her that as the adult, he'll protect her if anything happens. The princess blushes at his words, but suddenly she clutches her chest, complaining that her heart condition is getting worse. Sometime later, as they finally arrive at the shore, Deku crouches near some rocks and proudly reveals that their dinner will be tiny shellfish. Anastasia immediately recoils, horrified, thinking they're just small snails that wouldn't be enough for a rat. Pointing at the ocean, she argues why they have to eat such tiny creatures when there are plenty of fish out there. But Deku counters, reminding her that they don't have any fishing gear. Besides, shellfish are edible, easy to catch, and perfect for regaining strength. Still, Anastasia refuses. Puffing up with pride, she boldly declares that as the 7th princess and a great magician, she doesn't need tools to catch fish. Running toward the shore, she vows to do it with magic. Spotting some innocent fish, she raises her hands and chants, calling the tides to answer her. Suddenly, a whirlpool forms, swirling with force until the fish are trapped inside her spell. As Deku stares in shock, realizing the elf girl actually caught a fish, Anastasia orders him to stop staring like a moron and grab it immediately. The bearded man immediately obeys and charges forward without hesitation, diving at the sphere. But the moment he tries catching the fish, the water prison bursts in his face and the fish slips free, splashing back into the ocean. Frustrated, he turns, only to see Anastasia has collapsed into the waves, having lost control of her magic. Panicking, he rushes in, carries her ashore, and tries to shake her awake. But Anastasia coughs weakly, struggling for breath as seawater spurts from her mouth. Deku quickly pats her back, urging her to spit it out, and finally, after vomiting up the water in her lungs, she gasps for air, still pale and trembling. When he asks if she feels any better, Anastasia nods faintly. But then her stomach growls so loudly, like that of a starving hippo, it shakes the moment. Deku, startled, asks if she's really that hungry, and Anastasia admits she's starving. Even worse, she is drained of stamina after using so much magic. Just after she says this, Deku spots something on the nearby rocks. Moving closer, they see dozens of shellfish covering the stone surface. Excited, Deku laughs, saying they found food, thanks to her magic that led them there. Later that night, as the two sit together warming by the fire, Deku raises a stone high and smashes it down on a pile of shells, cracking them open with ease while the elf girl watches wide-eyed, unsure of what to expect. Shell fragments scatter, and the bearded man calmly explains that if you wash them, they can be eaten. After that, he picks one up without hesitation, takes a bite, and nods. To him, it's not bad at all. He says it tastes more like a simple snack, and then encourages Anastasia to try. At first, the elf princess hesitates, her face stiff with doubt, but then she nervously picks one up and takes a bite. When Deku asks what she thinks, Anastasia instantly coughs it out and collapses to the ground, gagging. When she finally recovers, she complains that it tastes worse than food from the trash. Deku is shocked and asks if she has never eaten shellfish before, and the elf princess admits it, explaining her diet back in the elven palace was mostly fruits, vegetables, and forest goods, with very little meat or seafood. Seeing Anastasia has grown extremely weak since using magic, and shellfish is clearly too strong for her, Deku starts thinking of an alternative. Suddenly, his eyes land on a leftover coconut. So he cracks it open and urges her to drink. Hesitant at first, Anastasia takes a sip and her eyes light up. The cool sweetness spreads in her mouth, refreshing her instantly, and before she realizes it, she blurts out that it's delicious. The bearded man is relieved she finally found something she enjoys. As she drinks, Anastasia admits it's her first time trying coconut, since all her life she was shut away in the palace, practicing magic endlessly and cut off from the world outside. Deku smiles warmly. He promised to show her more delicious things once they leave the island and she travels with him to Tokyo. The elf princess brightens at his words, but then her smile fades as she reminds him she's a princess, bound by duty, and the world itself is still at war. Deku listens quietly, but then his eyes drift to the coconut in her hands. He notices it's nearly empty, with barely any juice or flesh left to keep her strength up. Concerned that she isn't eating enough, an idea suddenly hits him. Leaning forward, he asks if she knows about tapioca. Anastasia blinks, confused by the strange word. Noticing her blank look, Deku explains, describing tapioca as chewy pearls in sweet milk tea that young people love. Then with rugged confidence, he suggests they give it a try, but instead of pearls, he decides to use snail meat inside the coconut. Anastasia stares in horror, questioning the dust-brain logic of this mentally deranged plan. But Deku goes ahead anyway, dropping a snail chunk into the coconut drink. The moment Anastasia takes a sip, the snail chunk shoots up the straw and squishes in her mouth. She chews hesitantly, then gulps it down. Coughing and struggling, she admits the coconut's sweetness dulls the gross taste of the snail meat and makes it less repulsive than expected. Encouraged by her words, Deku pours more snail chunks into the coconut drink, and Anastasia reluctantly keeps drinking. This time, she feels a bit more energetic and admits it isn't satisfying, but it helps. Afterwards, she praises his odd ingenuity, calling his ideas surprisingly useful. Feeling better, she hands the coconut back to him and insists he try it too. The hairy man agrees and takes a big sip, but the instant it hits his tongue, his face twists in agony and he spits it out violently, declaring the taste absolutely devastating. Later that night while sleeping, Anastasia trembles from uneasy dreams. In the dream, she suddenly hears her name and instantly recognizes the voice. She looks up and sees her mother standing before her with a warm smile, saying she's glad she is fine. Overwhelmed, Anastasia runs forward, calling out to her, truly believing she's been rescued. But her hope shatters when her mother tells her the Elven Empire has fallen. Anastasia freezes in despair, refusing to believe it. As they speak, the terrifying dragon King Naga suddenly appears behind her, ready to exact revenge. Anastasia panics, but her mother's cold words cut deep, telling her it's all her fault for leaving their empire defenseless. Before Anastasia can process what her mom just said, the dragon charges, and she cries out for her mother, but everything explodes in fire and light. At that moment, Anastasia wakes with a gasp, drenched in sweat by the campfire, and realizes it was only a terrible nightmare born from guilt. Yet even awake, the fear lingers. She hugs herself, realizing it's been 3 days since she left the battlefield and no rescue has come. If things go on like this, the elven forces won't last against Naga, the Dragon King. Desperate, she wonders if there really isn't any way to leave this god-forsaking island, and thinks maybe the bearded human will know. But as she moves through the forest, searching for Deku, she halts when she hears a strange voice echoing among the trees. Startled, she can tell the voice doesn't belong to Deku and decides to follow it, curious to know who else could be on the island. Cautiously, she hides behind the bushes, and her eyes widen when she sees Deku. Except something's off as she notices sparks of magic light dance around him. Anastasia freezes in shock, knowing full well the guy shouldn't be able to use magic. Panic spreads through her as she wonders if he's been deceiving her all along. Heart racing, the elven princess bolts, questioning if everything up to this point has just been a scheme to trap her on the island. But when she glances back, she sees the human fearfully chasing after her like a wild beast. Instinctively, Anastasia turns, casts a lightning spell, and blasts him with a surge of power. Yet Deku doesn't fall. Instead, the bearded man just smirks like a villain through the lightning sparks, and Anastasia's blood runs cold at the sight of his sadistic smile. But in an instant, he pins her down and then clamps a hand over her mouth. Anastasia struggles, but Deku urgently whispers for her to stay quiet. Suddenly, a massive, tusked beast stomps past them. Anastasia's eyes widen in terror as Deku leans close and silently reminds her of the monsters that roam the island. Once the creature passes, Deku explains that the beast is extremely territorial, attacking anyone who dares enter its domain. He calls it the violent, stingy Mohawk pig, though Anastasia recognizes it by another name. The Quake Hog, a dangerous earth attribute monster found in mountain forests. Even if considered a lower-class beast, without magic, it's lethal. Without wasting time, Deku then insists they leave the beast's territory immediately. But before they can escape, the monster notices them and charges. Anastasia freezes in fear, but Deku grabs her and rolls them both out of the way. They tumble down a cliffside and crash hard against the ground below. Catching her breath, Anastasia panics and asks Deku if he's okay. Deku winces, says he's fine, and admits he took a gamble by jumping off the cliff, but luckily they survived. Once they reach a safer distance, He assures her they should be fine now. But suddenly, Anastasia turns on him, accusing him of deceiving her, shouting that he's the reason she can't use her magic. Deku, confused, tries to defend himself, but the elf doesn't listen. She insists she saw it, a radiant seal cube, advanced magic used to trap prisoners inside light. Puzzled, Deku pulls out his smartphone and asks the Stone Age princess if this is the magic she's talking about. Anastasia gasps and nods, calling it a radiant cube that can seal a person. Amused, Deku scratches his head and explains it's just a device, not sorcery. He tells her it can't even connect here, but it can still do other things like watching videos. When he shows her the survival video he was watching when she saw him, Anastasia gasps, thinking it's a vision spell, but Deku clarifies it's not magic, just human technology. Realization sinks in, and Anastasia's anger fades into quiet shame. Lowering her gaze, she admits she feels useless, lamenting that she can't even fulfill the mission her father gave her. All she can do is wait for rescue, powerless and helpless. Overwhelmed, the elf princess breaks down in tears, calling herself good for nothing and blaming herself for causing the trouble that got him hurt. But Deku cuts in, insisting that's not true. He says he just discovered something only she can do. Pulling out his smartphone again, he tells her it's more than just for communication. It has tools like a compass and flashlight. But the problem is the battery. Using it drains power, and once it's gone for good. Then Deku explains what shocked him most. Her lightning magic somehow charged it by 1%. Anastasia looks confused, but Deku is overjoyed. He tells her the phone holds survival videos and digital books he desperately needs, since he's no survival expert. He assures her that if she can charge the phone, she becomes the key to keeping them alive. At first, Anastasia is uncertain, saying she doesn't really understand the bullcrap he's spouting. But when he begs her, she finally accepts, and then proudly declares she'll take on this important role as his personal phone charger. Unbeknownst to them, someone watches from the trees. But Deku's survival senses immediately catch the danger. So without hesitation, he quickly throws himself over Anastasia to shield her. When Anastasia turns to see the threat, she gasps in shock. Standing before them is none other than the Dragon King Naga, with a wicked grin and a dangerously hot body. Deku is stunned when he hears Anastasia call the big-plotted girl the Dragon King. When he asks if she's an acquaintance, Anastasia quickly explains that she is a dragon. She lectures him that dragons possess incredible magical power, even rivaling the Elven Empire. And the one standing before them isn't just any dragon. She's the Dragon King, the strongest of them all. Still confused, Deku covers his eyes and insists the dragon girl should at least cover up, to which Anastasia clarifies that dragon people strip before battle because they transform into dragons, making clothes pointless. Deku sighs and suggests they at least get her something to wear for the time being. But then he notices a cut on Anastasia's neck from the earlier attack, and Anastasia explains Naga had aimed straight for her vitals. Furious, Deku turns to the dragon girl and scolds her for her reckless actions that nearly sent Anastasia to an early grave. Before he finishes, Naga charges straight at him. Seeing the incoming attack, Deku throws both hands up to guard but gets kicked and is sent flying. Anastasia cries out, begging them to stop, but Naga grabs her by the hair and mocks her for not using magic, while the elf princess trembles, powerless to fight back. Deku finally staggers to his feet and tries to reason with the psychopath, saying fighting benefits no one since they're all stranded on the same island. But Naga just sneers, tells him to shut his trap and stop being a nosy Karen. For 50 years, she says, dueling Anastasia has been her only joy, and now she wants the fight to continue. With that, she yanks Anastasia's hair harder and then drives a fierce punch into her stomach. Deku screams for her to stop, and when he can't take it anymore, he grabs Naga's hands and coldly tells her to back off. But the dragon girl gives him a deadly stare and asks if he has a death wish, before unleashing her claws at him. Unexpectedly, the human swerves like a pro boxer, then jabs her in the gut, forcing her to stagger back. Naga's eyes widen in disbelief as she can't believe a miserable human just landed a solid hit on her. Anastasia, on the other hand, stares in awe. When she demands to know who the heck Deku really is, Deku answers plainly, saying he's just a school teacher. It is revealed that the school where Deku once taught in Tokyo was more like a prison than a place of learning. It was a lawless institution, a place where even teachers had to use their fists to control students. And Deku was the one teacher in charge of discipline. One day, he had walked up to the one-eyed principal and asked if such violence was still allowed in the modern era. The answer he received was grim. The ugly principal replied that the school belonged to no era, only chaos. From that day on, Deku embodied the violence, declaring the school the battlefield of turbulent times. Now back in the present, as Deku faces off against the Beast Girl, he calmly admits he hates problems, but if anyone wants a problem, then no problem. However, to be clear, he warns he won't show any mercy, hoping the Psycho Girl will quit before things get serious. But the Dragon Girl only grins. Instead of backing down, she then charges like a wild animal. Deku braces himself, but she calls it just a warm-up. With insane power, she unleashes her move, Dragon Claw Burst. The impact shakes the battlefield like a shockwave, scattering dust and rubble everywhere. Deku stumbles back, stunned, and is shocked to see that the Beast Girl can also use magic. Before he can figure it out, she breathes fire directly at him, which Deku barely manages to evade and panics, realizing this isn't a normal opponent. She's a monster, and he has no clue how to fight something like her. Meanwhile, the Dragon Girl just laughs wildly and demands more entertainment, while Deku is forced onto the defensive, retreating under her relentless pressure. From the side, Anastasia calls out Naga's sloppy fighting style. She says this isn't like her and suspects she's holding back, testing the human rather than going all in. This pisses off the Beast Girl, who reminds her that she is the Dragon King and then mocks humanity as nothing more than insects. She then promises to show her true power and transform, just like Anastasia wanted. Suddenly, the Beast Girl's form begins to shift, and before their very eyes, she transforms into her monstrous Dragon King form, shocking Deku, who's about to lose his mind. The beast threatens to roast him alive, then promises that once the human is sushi, the little shrimp girl will be next. Upon hearing this, Deku clenches his fists, ready to face it head-on, but suddenly an explosion shakes the ground, startling him. Anastasia, however, already knows what's happening. From the start, she understood that even though dragon bodies can store both mana and magic power, transforming requires massive amounts of energy. In mana-rich environment, replenishment is easy. But in the island where the mana is depleted, it's nearly impossible. After burning through her mana reserves, Naga is forced back into her human form and can't transform again. But even in her weakened state, Naga refuses to accept defeat to some human as she charges straight at Deku and starts swinging wildly. However, Deku keeps his guard up and blocks, but the impact rattles him. As they trade blows fiercely, Deku is shocked to see that the Beast Girl is still insanely strong even without magic. But then, in a split-second distraction, the Dragoness seizes her chance. She pounces on him and locks him in a chokehold. Deku struggles and narrowly escapes, but not without a bloodied nose. Seeing his injury, Anastasia immediately rushes over in concern, but Deku waves her off, insisting it's just a scratch. Still, he scolds himself, knowing he can't afford to be distracted, especially by the Dragon Girl's two bouncy weapons. To ward off his freaky thoughts, Deku does something unexpected. He punches himself in the face again and again, while Anastasia watches in horror. Meanwhile, Naga assumes this is him going all out, so she squeezes out every last drop of mana in her body, determined to respond with equal seriousness. With a smirk, she unleashes her sharp Dragon Claw middle finger and lunges at Deku. The human barely manages to block with a broken branch, which shatters the instant the Dragon Girl's claw touches it. Seeing Deku struggle, Naga grins wickedly and lunges again, this time aiming straight for his chest. But unexpectedly, Deku pulls a small blade and in one swift motion, slices off Naga's razor-sharp middle finger. The Dragon Girl gasps in shock, realizing it's no ordinary blade but a weapon forged from elven magic ore. Before she can retaliate, Deku cocks his fist back and slams it into her jaw. The brutal blow sends her flying across the ground, knocking her out cold. With the Dragoness defeated, Anastasia rushes and asks if Deku actually managed to defeat her. Deku nods and then suggests tying the crazy girl up before she wakes. But he suddenly freezes when his eyes lands on her super-sized melons, and then starts awkwardly debating whether to clothe her first or restrain her. His hesitation makes the elf glare in annoyance, cheeks puffed with jealousy. Still, they manage to bind her. Afterwards, Deku pulls out the blade he had used earlier and returns it to Anastasia. Feeling like she had offended him by not telling him about the knife sooner, Anastasia quietly accepts it and explains why she had kept it hidden all this time. She says it isn't just a weapon, but a keepsake from her mother, a blade meant for self-defense, but also a last resort to escape torture if captured in war. In a soft voice, Anastasia admits she couldn't bring herself to use it recklessly in a place like this. But now, realizing it could be of great help to the human, she hands the blade back to him, saying she has decided to entrust it to him. The hairy man is taken aback, asking if it's really okay to give him something so precious. The elf princess nods firmly, saying that with the knife, she believes he can carve a path to their survival. Deku finally accepts the blade and with a bright smile, promises they'll escape the desert island together. Just then the dragoness stirs awake. She stretches her neck, still feeling the sting from that brutal punch, and admits the hit was quite impressive. As she speaks, Anastasia notices she has secretly used her claws to slice through the cloth restraints. Deku, however, braces himself, asking if she really plans to keep fighting after everything. But instead of attacking, Naga suddenly leans forward with a wicked smile and says she wants to have his babies. Hearing this absurdity, Anastasia explodes in shock, calling it shameless and disgraceful. But the dragonkin only grins and explains it's simply their custom. Among dragonkin, females bear children only from males stronger than them, ensuring powerful offspring. Since no male had ever defeated her until now, she declares Deku the first worthy one. The hairy man listens calmly, but instead of panicking, he explains practically how impossible it would be to raise a child on a deserted island with no food, no doctors, and no education. However, Naga makes it clear she isn't asking. She warns it's an order and then forcefully pins Deku to the ground, ready to put the sausage in. But suddenly, she stops halfway, refusing to give the viewers what they want, and decides to settle it another time. Turning away, Naga says she's hungry and will look for food instead. But Deku calls out, asking her to wait, and calmly invites her to join them. Anastasia gasps in shock hearing this. But Deku makes it clear he has zero concern about their petty drama, and survival would simply be easier if they worked together. In response, the dragoness laughs mockingly, reminding him that she's the Dragon King, so she doesn't need to live in groups like weak humans. With that, she storms off, leaving the two behind. Meanwhile, Anastasia is lost in thought, worrying that even though Naga isn't at full strength now, she might attack again once she recovers. Calling her name, Deku snaps her out of it and suggests they return to camp for the time being. Back at camp, Deku immediately reminds Anastasia that they need to tend to their wounds first. He starts by pouring boiled, filtered water to wash her injury. When she hesitates, worried about wasting precious drinking water, Deku explains that wasting clean water is safer than risking infection. After that, he hands her a towel to clean the bruise on her neck. But Anastasia admits she doesn't know how to treat wounds without magic, since healing was always done magically in her world. So Deku agrees to handle it for her. When he starts disinfecting her collar wound with the boiled water, Anastasia squeals in embarrassment, blushing furiously. Once that's done, he moves to apply a disinfectant spray but warns it might sting. The moment it touches her skin, Anastasia screams like a madwoman but reluctantly accepts it, forgiving him since she knows he means no harm. With that finished, Anastasia's eyes fall on Naga's claws sticking out of Deku's pocket. When she asks why he brought them along, Deku pulls it out, explaining that since the claw is sharp and strong enough to cut through tree trunks, he wonders if he can turn it into a tool. Intrigued, Anastasia asks to take a closer look. As she examines the claw, she explains that dragon claws are normally strong enough to cut steel, but she notices something strange. The blessings and protective spells on Naga seem weaker here, fading away because of the island's lack of mana. To demonstrate, she compares it to her own body, showing how her hair tells the same story. The strands that grew before coming to the island are solid and strong, but the parts that grew while on the island are fragile and lack magical protection. As Deku takes a closer look at her hair strand, an insane idea suddenly hits him. Excited, he rushes over to Anastasia's bed like a maniac, startling her. When she nervously asks what he's doing on her bed, the bearded man blurts out his plan. By combining Naga's claw as a hook and her hair as a line, he can craft professional fishing gear. Without waiting for 5 business days for her to understand, Deku immediately suggests they go test it out. At the shore, Deku casts the line into the sea while Anastasia sits nearby, still lost in thought. When she can no longer hold it in, she asks if Deku is really planning to make Naga their ally. Deku admits he might be considering it, but Anastasia snaps, saying elves and dragons have always been at war. She reveals she and Naga, as warrior princesses of their clans, have fought countless battles for 50 years, never once settling the score. Furthermore, Anastasia calls Naga a self-centered battle maniac who constantly sought her out for duels, even though she herself had always hated fighting. When Deku curiously asks Anastasia her age, she gets embarrassed and reminds him how rude it is to ask a lady such a thing. Turning her face away, she then timidly blurts out that she's 148 years old. Deku freezes, realizing the girl who looks like some random brat is actually older than Dracula. Anastasia gets serious again, explaining that since both she and Naga hold the power to decide the outcome of the war between their nations, she wouldn't want to hang out with someone like that. Deku listens quietly, unsure what to make of it, but one thing he knows now is that all her wild talk isn't just delusion anymore. So he tells Anastasia a story about 2 enemies forced to share the same boat during a storm, and then later realized their survival would require cooperation. With that, he tells Anastasia that she and Naga must set aside history and work together until they all leave the island alive. Just then, Deku reels in his makeshift line and, to Anastasia's shock, pulls out a massive fish in one swing. Later that day, as they roast the fish over an open fire, Anastasia digs in happily, stuffing her cheeks full with a blissful smile. For the first time, she looks completely satisfied. Afterwards, they head to the beach to gather more supplies washed ashore. At sunset the next morning, as they head to the shore, Anastasia reflects that even though the fish wasn't huge, it felt like their first real meal on the island. Deku agrees, remembering how they also found useful supplies the day before. Suddenly, Deku's eyes catch something ahead. They rush toward it, only to find Naga lying motionless on the sand, beaten up and barely conscious. Checking on her, Deku notices Naga is bleeding and suggests they carry her back to camp, something Anastasia reluctantly agrees to. Once there, Deku gently lays Naga down on a bed of leaves. Examining her injuries, he sees it's badly inflamed with pus oozing out. He also noticed her forehead burning with a dangerous fever and realizes it's a deadly infection. Without proper medicine, she might not make it. So Deku urgently insists they do what they can in the meantime. However, Anastasia hesitates, reminding him that the crazy hag literally tried to unalive them yesterday. But Deku refuses to just let her die. So he instructs Anastasia to boil water and cloth to disinfect, determined to fight the infection with whatever tools they have. As he starts cleaning the wound, Naga reacts violently even in her fevered state. Meanwhile, despite her unease, Anastasia agrees to help. Together, they struggle against Naga's wild strength trying to wash her injuries. At last, Deku manages to restrain her and yells for Anastasia to pour the disinfectant. But before she can, Naga unconsciously headbutts Deku and tries to escape. But Deku quickly grabs her, locking her in place in a sus position, refusing to let go. With one last burst of resistance, Naga slams him into the ground, but the hairy man wraps his arms all over her plotful body, forcing her to stay still. Deku then grabs the disinfectant bottle, shouting he'll pour everything in. As he does, Naga screams in pain, her whole body shaking violently. Slowly, the fight drains out of her and finally, Naga's body relaxes. Deku sighs in relief, but Anastasia looks worried. They've already used up more than a bottle and a half of their precious water just to clean the wound. With anxious eyes, she tells the human only one bottle remains, and Naga's fever is still burning high. But Deku insists there's no use lamenting over it, and says they should move quickly in search of more water. However, when they return to the spot where they had found water days ago, they discover the source has completely dried up. So they head to the beach several times to scavenge bottles, and luckily they find some leftover freshwater in one, Before the sun sets, they also try fishing, managing only a small fish, a crab, and some shellfish. Still, the situation grows worse. Their resources are dwindling, and Naga's fever continues to burn hotter by the minute. With no antibiotics and no hope of finding any, Anastasia finally admits there might be one desperate way to save Naga, through magic. She explains that magically blessed races are normally protected from most illnesses by protective spells. But with no mana in the air, that protection has faded, leaving Naga defenseless against infection. Anastasia continues, saying that if they can somehow activate Naga's protective magic, her body might heal itself. The problem is, in a mana-scarce environment like this island, casting magic consumes an enormous amount of power. However, Anastasia points out that if they can use magic conversion to transfer magic power from others, Naga should be able to activate her protective spell, which could improve her condition. Determined to help, Deku reasons if he has any magic power at all, he'll give it to her. But Anastasia shakes her head, explaining that the magic power of an untrained human is practically useless. Still, she admits she noticed he has a strong life energy, something that can be converted into magical energy. But there's a cost. Anastasia warns that this kind of transfer requires physical contact for more than half a day, draining his stamina each time. Looking him directly in the eye, she asks if he still plans to go through with it, because if he collapses, with their food and water already running so low, then all three of them will be doomed. Deku realizes their sense in what the elf princess is saying. Resources are too scarce to sustain 3 people, especially with Naga injured. He silently agrees with Anastasia's worries, clenches his fist, and resolves to transform his physical energy into magical energy, but curses their lack of supplies. Suddenly, the mention of the word transform sparks an idea. He remembers the iron bucket they picked up and rushes to grab it. Excited, he explains to the chicken-brained princess that if they boil seawater in it, they can separate the salt from the fresh water. But then he pauses, realizing he hasn't figured out how to collect the steam. But just then, another brilliant idea hits him, and he immediately grabs the knife Anastasia had given him. When the elf princess demands to know what he's doing, the bearded genius declares he's building a distillation apparatus. He explains the principle simply: boil seawater, collect the steam, and it becomes potable water. Improvising with scraps, Deku dismantles a chair, using its hollow legs as pipes. He carves a hole, connects it to the bucket, and rigs together a makeshift distillation device. Once it's done, he eagerly suggests they test his invention and asks Anastasia to fetch some seawater, which she immediately rushes to do. With seawater now in the bucket, they place the device over the fire, and soon steam begins to condense into the bottle. An hour passes, and they manage to collect about 300 ml of fresh water. Deku drinks first, then hands it to Anastasia. As she takes a sip, her eyes widen in shock, realizing it, indeed, fresh water. Relieved, Deku reflects on the importance of adaptability and survival, turning junk into life-saving tools. But with the water issue finally solved, Anastasia raises another concern. Converting physical energy into magic drains stamina. Once the process is complete, she warns, his body will crave food, and asks how he plans to find food if he's completely exhausted. Deku agrees, knowing she's right, so they'll need to stock up before attempting the magical ritual. Determined, he says they'll set traps and hunt prey. With resolve burning in his eyes, he says he wants to save Naga, but he'll need Anastasia's strength. After some hesitation, the elf princess agrees to help, but warns that if his life is ever in danger, she'll stop the spell, no matter what, and Deku nods in agreement. With that, Anastasia tends to Naga, keeping her fever under control, while the dark-haired man focuses on preparing traps and weaving tools. Later, Anastasia watches the pot boil as Deku returns carrying supplies. They've managed to gather fish, shellfish, and even edible plants, enough to make a simple meal. Hesitant at first, Anastasia sips the broth made from the boiling ingredients, and her eyes widen in surprise at the taste. Deku gives her a proud thumbs up and then gives some to Naga, who drinks even though she is half-conscious. By day's end, they manage to distill enough water, 4 bottles in total. Deku notes that it's progress, even if the process isn't perfect yet. He knows Naga will still need more, but at least for now, they all have enough to get by. He has also set traps for hunting and fishing, marking them carefully. But despite their preparations, Anastasia worries that Naga's fever still refuses to break. Deku agrees, admitting they might have to rely on magic after all, and suggests they start immediately. The ritual begins with Anastasia drawing a magic circle in the sand, placing Naga peacefully inside it. She then instructs Deku to take off his clothes and hold Naga through the night to transfer energy. Deku hesitates for a moment, but Anastasia reminds him that direct contact is the only way to pass magic in this mana-scarce land. With that, he steels himself, reminding his inner self that saving a life is a noble act that must come first. After stripping, Deku holds Naga's unclad body tightly, trying so hard not to jizz, while Anastasia channels her own spell, pouring her heart and life force into the process. By the time the exhausting ritual ends, Anastasia is completely drained, so she heads to the waterside to catch her breath. But her chest aches in a way she doesn't understand, and she wonders if it's from overusing magic or from feelings she can't ignore. At the same time, she fumes about how Deku is being way too kind to Naga, like a stupid simp. She rants inwardly about him risking his own life for someone he barely knows, sharing food and water without hesitation. Yet deep down, she admits that's exactly why she's come to trust him from the bottom of her heart. Meanwhile, Deku slowly regains consciousness, weighed down by the exhaustion of the magic transfer. Just then, he suddenly feels two enormous weights pressing against his chest. Snapping his eyes open, he freezes, seeing Naga right on top of him, awake and dangerously close. Still disoriented, with no idea where she is or why, the nutcase suddenly insists on making babies to finish what they couldn't last time. Deku panics and tries to push her off, but to his horror, his strength is far too drained to restrain her properly. But as Naga takes hold of his fun stick, she's disappointed, realizing it's floppier than a week-old ramen, so she cries bitterly. Meanwhile, Anastasia returns carrying seawater, only to freeze at the ungodly sight. She panics, demanding to know what in the OnlyFans is going on, while Deku closes his eyes, too embarrassed to explain. He just begs her to move the magnum-craving freak off his body, admitting his strength is gone. Reluctantly, Anastasia agrees, and when she does, she's surprised to discover that Naga's fever is nearly gone. Deku sighs in relief, but his body collapses, completely powerless from the mana transfer. As he forces himself upright, extreme hunger nearly rips his guts out, leaving him clutching his stomach. Seeing his situation, Anastasia steps up to help by asking where the traps are, ready to fetch food herself. Deku is taken aback by her offer, finding it hard to believe, but eventually he hands her his bag to take along. So Anastasia rushes out, promising to return quickly. Getting to the river, Anastasia pulls up the traps and is shocked to find them full of fish. However, her excitement is cut short when she stumbles on another trap and spots a large rat. Her face twists in fear, but with trembling hands, she stabs it and catches it. Sometime later, back at camp, Anastasia calmly prepares everything into a meal. Together they eat, and Deku's exhaustion finally eases. After eating, Anastasia then mentions that Naga's fever has subsided, and she might recover by the next day. Hearing this makes Deku reflect on how hopeless he felt during her sickness and how powerless he was, realizing he couldn't do anything on his own. But thanks to Anastasia's determination and magic, they managed to overcome the crisis. Looking Anastasia in the eye, Deku sincerely thanks her for saving them all. Anastasia immediately blushes hard before bragging and reminding him of her greatness as the millennial magician. The following morning, the rays of the sun wake Deku from his slumber. He sighs, feeling like he's slept forever. But suddenly, he hears sounds of commotion. Turning, he's horrified to see a Naga with her claws out, standing over a bloody Anastasia. Deku immediately loses it and shouts Anastasia's name in panic. But when he calms down, he learns from Anastasia that while she was sleeping, Naga suddenly threw a dead rabbit at her, so the blood covering her is the rabbit's. It turns out before this happened, Naga had caught 2 bunnies and casually offered one to Anastasia, calling it a simple assistance. In the present, Naga mocks Anastasia, calling her a shrimp, and says she doesn't want her starving before they finally settle who's strongest. While she talks, Deku notices the blood around her mouth and asks if she really ate one of the bunnies raw. Naga proudly admits it, and then explains that dragons place great importance on the taste of their catch, which is why they eat it raw. But Deku warns her to stop eating raw food, pointing out that without mana, her protective magic won't work, meaning raw meat could expose her to dangerous germs. His words made sense because Naga finally realized that's exactly why she hasn't been feeling well. Following that, Deku then tries one more time to convince Naga to join them, asking that they all work together to survive and get off the island. This time, Naga actually listens. After a long, tense silence, she smiles and finally agrees, shocking everyone. Excited, Deku asks Anastasia what she thinks of the coalition. She says she's fine with it and trusts his judgment. With that settled, Deku suggests they focus on surviving and escaping the island first, then fight later if they must. But Anastasia still wants to know the reason behind Naga's sudden change of mind. Naga says the reason is simple. She wants to leave the island quickly so she can fight to her heart's content. Then, out of nowhere, the dragon girl grabs Deku by the collar and declares her second reason, that she badly wants to have his babies. Anastasia panics, calling the dragon a shameless degenerate and fuming at how easily she spits out such sick nonsense. But the dragon only smirks, teasing her and asking if she feels the same way too. Then she challenges Anastasia to see who can produce the strongest offspring with the bearded man. Anastasia yells, refusing to let such madness pass, while the dragon laughs, boasting that her strength is greater. The next day starts on a tense note with Naga clutching her stomach in pain, complaining that she's starving and she needs real food. Deku then offers her the shellfish he gathered earlier, but Naga yells that she could never feel full from such scraps. Standing tall, she loudly brags that, as the Dragon King, she'll show them what true hunting looks like. Immediately, she walks to the edge of the cliff while Deku stands beside her, asking if she intends to catch fish and warns her not to push herself too hard. But before he can finish, the stubborn dragon has already launched her unclad body in a wild leap straight into the sea. Moments later, she resurfaces, triumphantly holding a fish and laughing. Then she keeps showing off, pulling out big catches one after another with frightening speed, until she finally overexerts herself and collapses inside the water. Noticing this, Deku and Anastasia immediately rush into the water and drag her back onto shore. As Naga coughs out water violently, Anastasia can't help but laugh at her stupidity, while Deku worries over her reckless behavior. Embarrassed, Naga furiously shouts at Anastasia not to look down on her, only to become even more embarrassed at how pitiful she looks. Meanwhile, Deku observes Naga quietly and realizes that even though her strength is extraordinary, her control over it is hopeless. As days pass, the trio survives on a mix of fish, shellfish, crabs, plants, and even the occasional rabbit, but it's barely enough to cover their energy needs. Even worse, Naga burns through her strength faster than they can gather food, always pushing herself too hard, which makes Deku frown, knowing their supply is running dangerously thin. Suddenly, Anastasia runs up in a panic, shouting that the camp has been destroyed, and the group immediately rushes over to find the site trashed. Scanning the wreckage, Deku spots deep footprints in the dirt and confirms it to be the work of the massive Quake Hog, expanding its territory and finally reaching their camp. With this threat, Deku realizes their old base is no longer safe and insists they need to move quickly. They manage to salvage most of their supplies, but the damage to the bottles and their only bucket makes things even worse. As they are about to leave, Naga suddenly fires up and refuses to sit still. She declares that if it's a fight the pig wants, then she's ready to confront it head-on. Deku tells her not to be ridiculous, warning her about the beast's violent nature. But Naga won't back down, shouting that if they don't eliminate it, the monster will just keep coming back. When Deku reflects on her words, the truth hits him. The pig will keep spreading its territory, and soon they'll have nowhere left to run. Internally, he admits they can't avoid this fight forever. However, they have to be careful since the monster is enormous and aggressive. Turning to the girls, Deku then warns them that any mistake could mean death. Thinking fast, Anastasia suggests they start a fire, saying that with it they might stand a chance against the Quake Hog. Deku accepts the idea and scrambles to make a fire. While he desperately rubs the sticks together, Anastasia stands beside him, trying to work her magic. Naga, on the other hand, barges in, mocking them for struggling with such a simple task. She boasts that she'll show them how it's done, but when she picks up a stick and tries to ignite it with dragon fire, the result is nothing but a mess of roaring and frustration. With disappointment written all over her face, Anastasia looks at her the same way your mom looks at you every morning. Meanwhile, Deku keeps working with his caveman method until smoke finally rises. The moment Naga sees it, she rushes forward to blow hot air and make it flare into flame, but the moron only ends up coughing violently and vomiting all over it. Irritated, Deku scolds her for always pushing herself too hard, but before he can finish, she coughs in his face and accidentally sets his beard on fire. While all this chaos unfolds, Anastasia calmly summons fire with her refined magic. To test her progress, she blasts a tree, leaving a deep scorch mark, and proudly calls the spell Igni's Orb. Seeing the burnt tree, Deku is amazed and wonders how she managed to manipulate fire in the island. Anastasia explains that since Naga's earlier incident, she's been studying ways to use magic on the island. Instead of wasting mana to create elements, she's learned to borrow the elemental power already present in nature. She also reveals that this fire spell can evolve into explosive magic, and against an earth attribute monster like the Quake Hog, fire will have a natural advantage. Deku listens carefully, while Naga suddenly smacks Anastasia on the back, praising her discovery with surprising enthusiasm. Confident in Anastasia's new weapon, Deku suggests they start preparing a strategy. That night, as the girls sit by the fire waiting, Deku appears behind them. But when they turn, their hearts nearly leap out of their chests, seeing that he looks like the leader of a failed boy band. Deku then explains that part of his beard burned off, so he shaved it clean. Anastasia secretly thinks his new look is kind of cute, but Naga bursts out angrily, calling him a girly face and demanding he grow it back immediately. The next day, after finishing their preparations, Deku grips his spear, standing in unity with the girls, and declares that it's time. Before long, Naga stands before the monstrous boar and taunts it. As expected, the Quake Hog roars furiously, slamming its feet before charging straight at her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Deku listens carefully to the thundering steps of the beast, patiently waiting for it to draw closer. He glances at Anastasia, who has already prepared her magic circle, and urges her to hold on just a little longer as the sound of the stampede grows near. An hour earlier, the group had set their plan into motion. They gathered wood to fuel Anastasia's massive explosion spell. Anastasia then explained the strategy. She says Naga would lure the Quake Hog into range while she prepared the incantation, and at the perfect moment, she'd unleash it to finish the beast. But she also warned of the risks. The spell could only be cast once and would drain all her strength. Preparing it would take nearly 40 minutes, during which she would be completely vulnerable. Even once ready, she could only hold it for 3 minutes at most before collapsing. The group agreed. If the attack struck the Quake Hog's head, it would be fatal. But if it only hit the body, it might immobilize the beast, leaving them to decide whether to press on or retreat. Deku calmly accepted his role as Anastasia's protector while she was immobile, and Naga, with her unmatched speed, would act as the decoy. Now, in the present, Anastasia steadies her breath and continues her long incantation as Naga leads the raging Quake Hog toward the trap. Suddenly, Naga leaps over a fallen log but nearly trips, slowing her down just enough for the monster to close the gap. Furious, the dragon girl refuses to be humiliated and squares off against the charging beast instead of luring it to the trap. Deku, on the other hand, grows uneasy, realizing the plan is dragging out too long. He sees Anastasia's nose bleeding as her vision blurs and realizes she's reaching her limit. Suddenly, from afar, he sees the Quake Hog and Naga charging forward in a relentless tussle and wonders what the heck is going on. He desperately shouts for Naga to dodge quickly as Anastasia pushes through the pain, summoning her magic with trembling hands. Powerful flames surge towards the beast as she cries out her spell, Igni's Orb. The explosion slams into the beast, filling the air with fire and smoke and sending Naga flying. For a moment, Deku clings to hope, asking if they finally did it. But Anastasia, weak and panting, says no, and as she sees the beast still standing unscathed, she admits the plan failed. The monster roars in fury, and Deku quickly makes the call, ordering everyone to retreat immediately. With Anastasia in his arms, he bolts into the forest, trying to use the trees as cover. But the Quake Hog smashes through everything, closing the distance fast. Just as the beast charges in, Anastasia lifts her hand to defend them, but it's too late. Deku sees the attack coming and throws her away from harm's way. In the next instant, the Quake Hog's brutal strike lands squarely on him, sending him crashing back. Deku gets thrown to the ground, lying still and battered, while Anastasia cries out his name and then starts to panic seeing the Quake Hog turn its sights on her. The beast stomps forward and charges, but Anastasia struggles to move as her body won't respond. Suddenly, Naga leaps onto the monster with raw fury, grappling it wildly. As she attacks, she declares that the shrimpy elf is her prey, and no one else is allowed to touch her. Anastasia stares in shock, realizing the Dragon Queen is actually risking her life just to save her. But the Quake Hog tears free from Naga's grip and slams her into the ground. Then its gaze locks directly onto Anastasia again. Anastasia's chest tightens as she wonders why she's the only one being targeted. She speculates that the beast must be holding some kind of grudge against her for attacking it with magic. But before the Quake Hog can make a move, Deku rushes in with his spear, aiming for its weak point. After studying the beast, he notices its left ear is bleeding from the earlier explosion and that it can't see with its left eye, making that side the perfect blind spot. With all his strength, the protagonist drives the spear forward, targeting the vital point, but the strike doesn't land as deeply as he hoped. The monster counters swiftly, shifting its weight, and suddenly Deku finds himself pinned against a tree by the beast. He grits his teeth in pain as the beast tries to suffocate him under its massive weight. Anastasia screams his name in panic, and with sheer determination, her trembling hands push against the ground. Summoning every ounce of strength left, she forces herself up. Her legs shake, but seeing the beast crush Deku fuels her resolve. Desperately, she charges forward and plunges the spear deeper into the beast's chest, piercing its heart. The monster lets out a thunderous roar before collapsing to the ground and died instantly. With the beast finally defeated, Anastasia stares at her trembling hands, shocked that she actually did it. Deku then approaches her and steadies her with calm words, assuring her the violent Mohawk pig is finally dead. Overcome with emotion, Anastasia breaks down in tears, admitting how scared she was. But Deku gently pats her head, thanking her for saving him again and praising how well she did. Later, the group prepares a meal from the Quake Hog's meat. Deku, though inexperienced, follows a video to butcher the beast while Naga impatiently complains about her hunger. Soon, skewers roast over the fire, releasing a mouth-watering aroma. The girls eagerly grab their portions and Anastasia softly comments that it smells good, while Naga doesn't hold back, sinking her teeth in and shouting how yummy it is. Meanwhile, Deku takes a moment of gratitude, pressing his hands in prayer before eating. As they all savor the taste together, the rich flavor overwhelms them. Anastasia admits this is the most satisfying bite she's had since coming to the island, while Deku can feel the delicious taste of fat melt on his tongue. But their moment of delight is cut short by rustling in the bushes. The group looks up, tense once again, but from the shadows, a mysterious figure emerges. A girl with horns steps forward, collapsing right into Deku's arms, begging for food. She introduces herself as Millia, Princess of Niflheim and descendant of the Demon King. Anastasia immediately warns Deku not to trust her, explaining that demons have long brought calamity to the world and are notorious for deception. Naga, on the other hand, also complains loudly, not wanting to share her hard-earned meat with a stranger who didn't help with the hunt. But Deku points out they actually have more meat than they can finish. Millia, feigning helplessness, insists she's powerless without magic and just a starving woman trying to survive. She begs to stay with them, even claiming she'll do any task without complaint. Deku, seeing her desperation, notes that she seems willing to put in effort, even heavy work. Anastasia, however, still hesitates. Before they can decide, Millia suddenly presses Deku's head against her heavenly pillows, thanking him as if she's already been accepted. All the while, a sly smile crosses her face as she thinks to herself how easy humans are to manipulate. Shocked, Anastasia vents about how hard it was to lure the Quake Hog, while Naga simply ignores the drama, happily devouring the roasted meat. But behind her innocent facade, Millia reveals her true intentions. Inwardly, she vows to crush the elf princess and the dragon king for real and restore honor to the demon race. After defeating the stingy Mohawk pig, Deku feels a bit easy, because until now their movements had been restricted by that beast's presence. But with it gone, the entire island lies open for exploration. Still, survival comes first. Their bucket for distillation is broken, cutting off their steady water supply. And now, with more people to care for, their top priority shifts to securing a new source of water. Deku considers searching immediately, but the fresh meat from the boar needs processing before it spoils. So, roles are divided. Naga takes charge of exploring the unknown areas, tasked with finding water at all costs. But Deku warns her to be careful, since there might still be some monsters hiding in the island. Anastasia is left to handle firewood and attempt water distillation again. Meanwhile, because of her supposed bad health, Millia is asked by Deku to help with anything she can manage around camp. However, Anastasia strongly disagrees, warning Deku how dangerous it is to stay alone with a demon. Despite her concerns about Millia's true nature, Deku insists the demon girl can still help with lighter tasks, to which Millia smiles deceptively, saying she has no trouble gathering firewood. Shortly after, while Deku gets to work dismantling the massive carcass, Anastasia can't help but think about how gullible he is to even trust a demon. Deciding it's best not to leave him alone with Millia, she joins him in cutting up the boar, even though she's uncomfortable with the bloody task. As they cut into the beast, revealing organs and innards, Anastasia becomes completely overwhelmed by the gory sight. Deku, however, is excited at the sheer size of the liver and intestines. When Anastasia can't take it anymore, she faints from the grisly sight, leaving Deku and Millia to finish the work. Surprisingly, the demon girl shows no disgust and helps smoothly. With so much meat to process and store, Deku reassures himself they won't face food shortages anytime soon. He also reasons that if water is found and no new monsters appear, they might finally have some time to rest. If he does get such spare time, Deku imagines building huts like in the survival videos he once watched. He even thinks about making clay pots and hunting with a blowgun. But he quickly shakes the thoughts away, reminding himself this is no time to play around. Deku can't help but notice how easily Millia handles the cleaning of the beast organs. When he points it out, Millia simply reminds him she's a demon after all. She also notes that Deku has absolutely no fear toward demons, and unlike Anastasia, he carries no prejudice towards demons, which makes her oddly happy. When Deku asks if the prejudice against demons is because of the ongoing war between the races, Millia replies that it is a reason, but then reveals a deeper reason. She speaks of her father, Varnark, a powerful demon lord who once tried to rule the world but was ultimately crushed by the united armies of elves, dragons, and humans. Since then, demons have only grown weaker. Even in the ongoing war, Millia admits that demons can't compete with the Elven Empire or even the dragons. Millia goes on to share that even though some demons like her advocate for peace, it's nearly impossible to convince the other races that they've changed, since demons were the ones who started everything by invading the world long ago. Thinking to himself, Deku compares Millia's sad story to some of his own troubled students. Good boys at heart who, because of complicated pasts, struggled to fit in with the rest of the class. Millia concludes by saying that's why, when Deku accepted her, she was genuinely moved. Deku immediately brushes it off as no big deal, but Millia insists, saying she is truly grateful and wants to thank him. Leaning closer, she seductively lowers her voice and casts her succubus charm spell, whispering that she'll do anything for him and let him do anything to her. Deku feels the intense weight of her magic, designed to drag out hidden desires and hypnotize her target. His body tenses as Millia presses harder, asking what he wants her to do. But instead of giving in, the dark-haired guy's mind drifts back to survival tasks, the hut he wished to build, and the logs he needs her to help carry. The succubus, misreading his silence, laughs softly, certain she's finally broken through his defenses. She whispers again, urging him to release all his cultured desires. But Bro's real desires are about bricks and huts. Deku even demonstrates with his hands, mimicking a blowgun he wants to make. Millia, misinterpreting, assumes he means he wants some deep gawk. So with confidence, the clueless demon drops to her knees, convinced that, like every other man, Deku is just as easy. But just as she's about to pull out his shotgun, Naga bursts onto the scene with her usual loud energy. Startled, Millia jerks forward in shock and accidentally slams into Deku's fun ride, causing him pain like no other. Following this chaos, Naga reports on her exploration, proudly announcing she scoured the island and discovered a small pond, which she says is the only water source she could find. But when they finally get to this much anticipated water source, Deku's is shocked. The pond water is filthy, dark, and clearly unfit for drinking. He stares in disbelief, realizing their survival struggle has just leveled up. Moving closer, Deku realizes the water reeks and even has dead animals floating in it. He wonders if distillation might help, but knows the risk of poisoning is high. He also notices bones and pieces of fish scattered nearby and suspects the Quake Hog's poison seeped into the pond, paralyzing creatures that came to drink. Just when all hope seems lost, Deku suddenly spots a banana tree close by. His eyes light up as he rushes to check, and sure enough, it's a banana tree. With a swift cut, he extracts liquid from the trunk and asks if the girls want to give it a try. Anastasia sips first and finds it refreshing, but Naga spits it out instantly, gagging at the bitter taste and grassy smell. Deku then explains to the girls that banana trees can be used as herbs, and if a hole is drilled in the middle of the stem, it can store a fair amount of water per day. Their next find is a coconut tree, still full of fruit high above. Excited, Deku rushes to find a stick to knock the coconuts down, but Naga, impatient as ever, refuses to wait and declares she'll climb it directly. Before Deku can warn her of the danger, the dragon girl has already unleashed her monkey instincts and charge up the trunk. With ease, she starts shaking down coconuts, dropping them dangerously close to the others. Sometime later back at camp, Deku reflects on the harsh truth. Most of the island's resources are already used up. To stretch what they have, he sharpens stone blades for butchering while Anastasia carefully slices meat thin for smoking. It's tough work and not all of it is edible, but smoked properly, it should last them a month. Even with food secured, the biggest threat remains. The water problem isn't solved, and Deku knows it could decide whether they live or die. For now, coconuts and plant water will keep them going, but with 4 mouths to feed, he fears it won't last until rescue. He thinks back. 2 weeks have already passed since he landed on this island, and despite his smoke signals, no help has come. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the group rests by the shore after the day's activities. Deku, however, realizes Naga still hasn't returned from scouting and starts worrying about her safety. Suddenly, a loud scream echoes through the forest. Recognizing it's Naga's voice, Deku and Anastasia rush toward the sound, crashing through branches, until Naga bursts out of the trees herself, grabs Deku by the arm and drags him along, shouting for him to come. Before he can ask why, she points to the horizon, showing him a beach where lightning pierces across the sky. Deku's eyes widen, instantly realizing it must be an island on the other side of the sea. Meanwhile, Anastasia whispers that such a phenomenon could only mean one thing: mana. If the island truly holds mana, then maybe they can use magic again and return home. Millia's face twists in anger at the mention of the girls returning, but the tension is cut short when Naga's stomach growls, and she bluntly reminds them it's time to return to camp. Back at camp, the group gathers around the roasted hog meat. Naga is thrilled to eat the offal, while Anastasia looks pale at the thought of eating organs. The sight of guts being pulled out still haunts her. Naga, on the other hand, is in bliss, devouring the meal and praising its flavor with her usual wild grin. When Anastasia finally decides to give it a try, she nearly vomits her intestines out, so Deku quickly gives her coconut water to cleanse her mouth, which she finds instantly refreshing and relaxing. Curious, Naga takes a sip too of the coconut water but immediately spits it out in disgust, declaring it the worst thing she's ever tasted. While this is ongoing, Millia silently watches. She finds it ironic that the princess of the Elven Empire, a girl who can crush armies, can't handle something as simple as eating innards. She remembers how, just by chanting a single spell, Anastasia once decimated countless demons, leaving behind a bloody mist and a battlefield drenched in terror. Back in the present, Naga leans back, satisfied, patting her stomach after the meal. She turns to Millia with a wicked grin, saying she can feel her strength overflowing. Then, suddenly, she stands and demands the demon girl fight her. Will the girls finally leave this horrible island? Comment, survival. if you're hyped to see what happens next in Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, drop a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content. Thanks for watching, as always.